Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm really appreciate everyone getting up early to be here, and appreciate Rolf and his team for organizing such a dynamic day. And really also want to express appreciation to all my colleagues who are joining with me today and talking about this topic. So I need to let you know that I am on a strict 20-minute presentation. So that's going to be hard for me. I've worked really hard to tighten up this presentation to give you the key points, and the good news, though, is that there'll be opportunity for lots of discussion afterwards. So I'm actually going to have to restrain myself, though, as I go through, not to do any additional ad-libbing or kind of interacting around some of the ideas, and look forward to your questions. So early childhood education is a fragmented field of practice, so please see that underscore of practice. And most of our reform efforts, though, are primarily attending to the field's fragmented delivery systems and its policies rather than its fragmented core function. And other than working with children or on their behalf, there are few commonalities that bind us together in terms of shared preparation, qualifications, and commitments. And rarely do we think of our roles as part of something larger than ourselves, our programs, or our separate sectors. So I think many of you are familiar with the fact that today's work is in part instigated by a new book called Early Childhood Education for a New Era, Leading for Our Profession. And it argues that the field should assume responsibility for competent practice of practitioners and positive results for children's learning and development. That we should formally organize as a profession to realize consistency in practice across sites and program types, and that we should develop field-wide leadership, and one of the more provocative points, to abandon reliance on public policy to define the field's purpose and structure. So you should think of Leading for Our Profession as a leadership manifesto. It moves beyond efforts to repair, cushion, or incrementally improve what isn't working, and it argues for deep system change to unify ECE as a field of practice, and it strives to redirect the field's trajectory. So because this is a leadership manifesto, there have to be some ground rules. And the ground rules are that if you don't leave this session without feeling provoked, I haven't done my job. At the same time, you have to know that on the one hand, it is personal, because we are all part of the change that I'm arguing for. So if you feel any sting, you should. But if you think it's personal to you individually, that would be a mistake, because sadly, I don't know all of you well enough to have an interaction with you at that level, if you will, to be that personal. So again, you may feel some sting, but please know it's not personal to you as an individual. So this is a defining moment. We have changed as a field of practice in terms of our scale. There's been enormous growth in programs, services, delivery systems, and the children served. Huge public recognition for the early years and early education. A focus now on systems building versus new programs, and y'all are heavily, heavily involved in that. And an emphasis on coordinating policies and delivery systems. There's been a very significant shift from program to teacher quality, and we are seeing the impact of external forces, especially from policy driving ECE reform. So for example, there's the shift from early care and education, which I know is the term that is used in Maryland, but more and more people are thinking of it as early education and care. There's increased direction setting from the federal level, and at the same time, there's a pivot to a 50-state change strategy. And the result is increased programmatic and systemic fragmentation, uneven performance, and weak leadership capacity. So what's changed for us? The context for our practice, external expectations for our work and what it should accomplish, and a widening gap between public expectations and the field's capacity to deliver. Our work and our trajectory as a field is being redefined in terms of purpose, how the agenda is being set for early childhood education, what the public expects of us, and what teaching and learning looks like in early childhood education settings. But what's unchanged? The field's inertia. My argument is it's time for change, but this time from the inside out. It's time for ECE to acknowledge culpability for the field's present status, to acknowledge practice as early childhood education's core function, to accept responsibility for the quality of the field's practice, to become collectively responsible, and to develop and exercise field-wide leadership so we can maximize our competence and our contribution to children's learning and development. We should organize as a professional field of practice. We should assume responsibility for uniformly competent practitioners to deliver on the promise. A vocation is not a profession just because we choose to call it one. We have to be recognized as such. So we may not often think beyond individual programs or sectors, but policymakers and others are thinking about how ECE should be organized to do its work. And because others are thinking that way and we're not, they're defining and shaping what it means for early childhood education to be a field of practice. So this is a defining moment. Too many children are losing ground. Too many children are not accessing their potential. There are big gains in knowledge, but we're not applying them. There are increased expectations for our performance, but we're not meeting them. I want you to read what this particular line says. ECE is gaining credibility, but not its practitioners. Others are filling the leadership void, and they are reforming early childhood education as a field of practice. We can do better, but we're not. I think it's time to assume responsibility, become a cohesive system of preparation, practice, and responsibility. Avoiding change is not one of our options. Staying the course is like navigating a new world with an old map, and I can credit a wealth management advertisement for that expression. So we need to eliminate our fractures as a field of practice, because those fractures are undermining competence and access. Voluntary strategies are not leading to practitioners collectively capable of competent practice. The field is becoming increasingly and unnecessarily complex and burdensome to navigate and reform, and layered interventions are creating still further fragmentation, intensifying capacity issues, and deflecting focus and resources from practitioner and program effectiveness. So what does it mean to be organized as a field of practice? In other words, to be a profession? So if you look up the meaning of organized, it's planned, well thought out, prepared, having a formal organization or structure, especially to coordinate or carry out widespread activities. So one example would be organized medicine. The next one I'm going to show you, which is actually my favorite, is organized crime. Not suggesting that we are criminals, but I think if you will pause for just a minute and to reflect and think about the ways in which organized crime is different from early childhood education as a field of practice, I think you'll get the gist. And these occupations are all organized as fields of practice. But we're not. We're not organized around shared intentions, practices, or outcomes. So for example, what is the name of this field of practice? This is one of the times when I always love to interact and get all the different names that we have for who we are. What does one need to know and be able to do to be recognized as an early childhood educator? And what outcomes are we facilitating, both individually and collectively? Becoming an organized or professional field of practice is going to require us to address questions of purpose, standards of practice, entry requirements, probably one of the more controversial issues, and responsibility. Because as this famous philosopher, everyone know who Yogi Berra is? You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you just might not get there. So our future is going to vary upon whether or not we become unified as a field of practice or remain a mix of disconnected programs and services. If we assume responsibility for practitioner competence or retain it as an individual option, structure ourselves so the knowledge base can be uniformly applied, or simply rely on a handful of strong programs to demonstrate what quality looks like, and if we're going to seize the opportunity to reorganize and define our future, or remain indifferent as a field of practice. And by not answering these questions, we're allowing children to spend their days in programs of uneven quality and effectiveness, making it harder to form a coordinated system, undermining chances to be recognized for specialized expertise, and enlarging the leadership void for others to fill. We don't own all the challenges that I'm naming, but our indifference and the absence of field-wide leadership is leading to a widening gap between rhetoric and behavior, between promises and performance. So it's time for change, but this time from the inside out. And needed is willingness to step forward for the field's future. So if you choose, this can be a time for determining our shared responsibilities to children, families, and society, for shaping ECE's future as a profession, and for realizing our aspiration to be recognized for our work. If we choose to organize as a profession, the change would be transformative, even if the process were incremental. Reforming as an organized field of practice would elevate teaching young children as a distinctive professional practice, define our work as a profession, and establish integrity as a field of practice. Whether to change is not an option. ECE will continue to change. We can step forward or prepare ourselves to be further changed. Left for ECE to decide is who will drive the field's future. Will it be the field, or will it be others? I've cast my vote, and you? Thank you very much.